Okay, we have Raymond Paddock here. Ray, who you've heard through many times, is at Central Council of Tlingit and Haida, Environmental Program Manager. Ray's going to talk about exploring partnerships, cooperative agreements, and co-management opportunities. And I'm just going to say there's a bit of a change in the agenda. The next panel thing will actually all be in this room together again. So sorry about the name issue. Ray.
Thank you, Heather. Good morning, everyone. Thank you guys for staying throughout the last 3 days. Much appreciation and thanks to the Grand Ron tribe as well. And again, to all you guys for being here. First off, I want to say, pardon me if I sound nervous. I always get nervous when I get up here. It takes a little bit to get used to. I'll find myself getting smoothing out the talk as we go along. But again, thank you guys. So yeah, I've been asked to talk about this, exploring partnerships, cooperative management, and agreements. And much of this is like the work that I do at Tlingit and Haida. We are a federally recognized tribe. We're not a consortia. But I act as I work for a regional tribe. So we don't have traditional homelands, but we represent Southeast Alaska in a lot of ways. So much of the work I do is regional. And that's kind of the partnership stuff I wanted to go into. But what I want to do is just kind of give an overview. I didn't really want to do a PowerPoint presentation, but I think part of that will kind of give an idea and lay down some of the foundation for you guys to kind of get a better view of how we operate at Tlingit and Haida. There we go. I'm sorry, guys. What do I press to change the slides? Okay. There. I'll let you. Sorry, I will say next then. Next, middle button. Is that what I heard? Okay. So in this cooperative agreement, this partnership aspect of it at Tlingit and Haida, we work on a regional effort in many areas, but I wanted to introduce some of my team on here. For the past couple of years, we've been able to, we started out with the GAP grant, an STRP grant, and I've been able to use that, the GAP grant to build out our capacity to do these programs. And essentially, as we're developing these programs, we work collaboratively with the Southeast tribes. What better way to bring your resources and build your capacity together than to do it collaboratively? We find a stronger voice in that aspect as well. Next slide, please. So this is kind of an idea of what we do at Tlingit and Haida. This is the programs that we've got, the GAP, the SCRP. I've been able to use the GAP grant to essentially build the capacity out to create a climate change adaptation plan, which led to being able to get more funding in other areas. And in the climate change part, we have obviously in Alaska, we have a food issue. Everything's transported up. So I'm hoping that with this, the TEHIT that you see, the regional greenhouse, we can start getting food sovereignty developed in Southeast Alaska. Again, it's going to take partnership and collaborative efforts to do on a region-wide effort because not one tribe could do this. Through that, we also have a compost and recycling grant we just submitted for the CPRG grant as well. I'm hoping that through the composting recycling grant, we could change the structure in Southeast Alaska on how solid waste is dealt with. Then we have the Brownsfield Transboundary Water Quality Monitoring System. Is something that we do on a collaborative effort with tribes throughout Southeast Alaska. So we were able to build our capacity out by essentially getting trained through the USGS on water quality monitoring systems. You guys heard some of the great presentations earlier this week from the Yukon Intertribal Watershed and several other organizations on how they do their water quality monitoring programs. But we do it on a collaborative effort with tribes throughout Southeast Alaska. So once we were able to get our process situated, we train the other tribes to do that because we can't always get out to the smaller communities to do these rivers, to do the sampling on these rivers, which is literally, it's not on a road system. It's way out in the middle of nowhere. So we work with the tribes to essentially save costs. Instead of having us travel, we can work with them. They can go onto the river system and do the studies, and we're all doing it in the same manner. They followed our QAP, which was something we had to reach out to other tribes to figure out how we're going to do too. So that partnership, that collaborative effort is key in ensuring that we have strength behind doing that, and then a uniform system as well. Part of that is, what I really want to explain is that partnership is really what brings the power behind it. It doesn't take away the sovereignty of the tribes. It doesn't take away the voice. It's just empowering. We got to remember that it's not a us versus them kind of thing. It's a together thing. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on that. We also have an extreme weather event program where we're monitoring landslides throughout Southeast Alaska as climate change is happening. We're seeing more landslides. You guys may have seen it on the news, but this is something that's affecting Southeast Alaska a lot more and more. So we're working collaboratively with the Sitka Sound Science Center, the USGS, and I'm hoping we can get the tribes in this partnership program as well. So we built the science part on that where they're able to be certified to do monitoring of the equipment that we do for landslide monitoring and as well as the research. So these are things we're calling collaborative efforts, but it's going to take the tribes to be a part of this because, again, not one tribe can do this alone. We also host the Southeast Environmental Forum, which is essentially kind of a TELS, Alaska Forum on the Environment, OTEF, and things of that nature. And we do that in Southeast Alaska because in Alaska, it's so huge. As you guys know, you may have learned how big Alaska is, and each part of the regions are different in their own. And Southeast Alaska tends to have issues of their own areas that need to be addressed. So we host an annual conference that brings the tribes together. It's hosted by the tribes, put on for the tribes. But as the years have gone by, that's expanded and it's allowed us to actually develop partnerships with our federal partners, our state partners, and other regional entities throughout the region. We're also in development of what's called the Seacoast Guardians Network sign. If you guys aren't sure what that is, we're still trying to figure it out, but it's essentially a collaborative effort to take care of environmental and natural resource issues. I wanted to try and give an example. In Alaska, there's the Sentinels program. If you guys may have heard of that, that's kind of what we're monitoring after, but we've actually done it based off what the Canadian tribes in BC have been doing. Of course, in Alaska, policy-wise, it's a different look than what Canada would do. But again, this is all collaborative efforts, and we're hoping to be able to use money that we get through an endowment to be able to use the programs to enhance tribal, environmental, and natural resource concerns. I'm still trying to figure out how that looks, but the hope behind that is to not be able to be stifled just by federal grants and federal dollars or state grants. As you guys know, you're limited in what you can do in your guys' grants. We have to follow the cooperative agreement to the T, but with this endowment, it allows us to essentially kind of have a little bit of freedom to do these monitoring efforts. So like say in your GAP grant, it's not you can't do compliant, or not compliance, I'm sorry. It's a capacity development grant. Implementation is where I wanted to say. You can't do implementation in your GAP grant, but so those are the kind of the limited things I want to say we want to avoid with this endowment. So it's an investment in ourselves and it's an investment in Southeast Alaska. Again, that's a partnership effort. We've been able to create an Alaska Youth Stewards Program. That's something we work with on the Forest Service and the USDA, but this is essentially an opportunity for our young people in our area to kind of follow the leads of what our tribal environmental program leaders are doing right now. So they get to start young and build on that. Essentially kind of stewarding our young people to be the best leaders that they can be. Then you see in the native lottsman and cultural resources aspect. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Again, general assistance is kind of, I touched on that, and my nervousness kind of started to talk about the things before the slides happened, so my apologies if it sounds like it's being repeated. But yeah, again, I wanted to just emphasize on how much GAP has been important for us in our development of our programs. But this essentially is the basis of where we started our capacity. Again, I started out with just a GAP grant and a state and tribal response grant, but I used the GAP grant to essentially build our programs out. And I know it's a tough thing to think about based off how much capacity certain tribes have or how much resources they have. But in all actuality, using your GAP grant to figure that out, it goes a long way. I'd say definitely recommend take advantage of your guys' GAP grant as to learn how to do it, because that's what essentially what it is. It's a capacity development. Take your time to build out your skills through the GAP grant to build out those other programs. And this is something that, again, we're doing in Southeast Alaska, and we try to spread this out to the other programs and work collaboratively together. I guess the meaning I'm wanting to hit on with you guys is just to remember to ensure that we can't do this by ourselves. It's to, we want to be able to ensure we're offsetting costs, sharing our resources, and ensuring we meet the needs by that, because we don't all have the money to be able to hit these capacity development aspects or the environmental efforts that we want to address. Next slide, please. Again, in this partnership aspect in Southeast Alaska, we've been able to create what's called the CTOR lab. It's essentially now consortiated out, but it's comprised of the Southeast Alaska tribes to do harmful algal bloom testing throughout the region. And each tribe does their samples on their own homeland, where people go out and traditional harvest, and they send those shellfish to the lab to ensure that it's safe to eat. Because as climate change is happening, we don't know when harmful algal blooms are going to hit. So it's literally a weekly thing. And in Alaska, we don't have the capacity, the state doesn't have the capacity to do testing on harmful algal blooms for subsistence gatherers. It's only left for essentially business and retail and restaurants and things of that nature. So it really does, it really makes it difficult for people who live off the land to ensure that they're safe eating the shellfish within Alaska. So we started that out, and it's a regional effort again. It's tribes being able to go out on the land and ensure that we have weekly samples done so that people can go subsist safely. That took a regional effort, and I'm hoping to do the same in developing a water quality lab in Southeast Alaska so that we can start again being data managers ourselves, offset cost with the tribes. It's pretty expensive to send water quality samples out of state or up to Anchorage. So I'm hoping that we can alleviate that again through a partnership development for the rest of the tribes in Southeast Alaska. Next slide, please. Climate change adaptation plan. Now, again, this was a regional effort as well. The adaptation plan is something that we did throughout Southeast Alaska. And in Southeast Alaska, climate change doesn't look the same as it does up in the northern part of Alaska, where you're seeing erosion, seashores being washed away, permafrost melting. In Southeast Alaska, like in the junior area, we have actually isostatic rebound happening. So while other communities are seeing that devastation of the seawater rise in Southeast, our land is actually rebounding up. So we're getting more land while the rest of Alaska is getting washed away in the shore. So it's different. We had to figure out what that looked like, and we leaned on our relationship development with tribes in the state of Washington, to figure out how our adaptation plan is made. Because you look up north again, different issues, different ways of approaching that. And since the geography in Southeast Alaska is similar to somewhat of Western Washington, Western Oregon, we relied on the tribes to essentially help us get that developed. So again, thanks to the tribes in Washington State for helping us out with that. Next, please. I mentioned the greenhouses earlier too. What you guys see right there is a dome greenhouse we have at our office at Clinton Haida. We're using this as essentially our capacity development part, where we want to be able to essentially start putting warehouse greenhouses throughout the region to ensure that we have food sovereignty. We don't know what that looks like yet, though. So what I'm hoping, though, too, what we get out of this, the regional or this capacity developing greenhouse, is how food sovereignty will look across the region in years to come. So this is essentially just what you see here is us trying to figure it out. We're going to have to, again, do relationship development with other tribes, and to ensure that we do have that food sovereignty issue to our food sovereignty issues resolved throughout the region. Next, please. Again, regional greenhouse program. So outside of that greenhouse we have in Juneau, we wrote a grant, and we're trying to, again, on a regional effort, put greenhouses in 4 communities right now. I'm sorry, 3 communities. We're eventually going to be able to do the development part of it and then pass it off to the tribes that want to take ownership of that down the long run. Next, please. Solid waste. This is something right now we did in the long run. I used to work, that's actually how I got started. I used to work on what's called SWAN, the Solid Waste Alaska Network in Alaska, with Zender Environmental, who's a big help. Thanks to them, greatly appreciate it. We kind of stepped away from the solid waste arena for a little bit, but now we realize again, as we're doing this regional development, let's say in the greenhouses, the water quality stuff and everything, solid waste is still an issue in Southeast Alaska. It needs to be addressed. So we recently just applied for a Swiffer grant, which we received, a compost grant, which we're hoping, again, address waste issues in the region. And we also just put in for the CPRG grant, hoping to essentially blend those programs together. Yeah, I could go into that a little bit more, but again, that's all through essentially partnership development. But we'll see what that looks like as it's still fairly new. Next, please. So just touch again, we did receive the Swiffer grant, which we're super excited about. And I'm really, really excited to continue to work with much of the EPA folks. I think that they're really going to be helpful in ensuring that we create a region-wide effort. And I don't know how that's going to look yet, but there's better people than me trying to work this out too. So next, please. And I mentioned the transpounder water quality program that we've got. So we have on the map, you guys can kind of get an idea of the rivers that start in Canada and flow into Southeast Alaska. And the reason why we're doing that is because of the mining development on the British Columbia side, where we, on the United States side, don't have any say to how that happens. There's no policies that we can advise them on. So that takes effort in creating a regional partnership development to meet those needs. So again, you see the tribes on here that we've worked with. They've had their now capacity at where they're trained on the water quality level. They've been certified. So we've been able to take that and pass that down and make this a regional effort concern, not just based by the tribes, but for the region. Next, please. Thanks to the BIA again, we use that to create our climate change adaptation plan. And so I mentioned the lab development. This is another BIA grant that we're using right now to essentially create a feasibility study to see what it would be like to have a water quality lab in Juneau. We're going to follow the model of what the Cedar lab in Sitka did, but this is going to be on another level, if you will. We'll be able to test for heavy metals, climate change issues, and hopefully with what we get in the lab, we want to be able to essentially build the capacity out and have that data sovereignty, the power behind the tribe to have that. Yeah, my apologies, I'm getting stuttery again. Excuse me. Next, please. So I mentioned the landslide stuff, and again, I feel like I'm repeating because I got nervous and started to get ahead of myself. But again, this is an effort to really ensure that we're doing the monitoring across Southeast Alaska on a partnership level. You can see the collaborators on the side right there. The one thing that's missing right now, though, is the other tribes in that partnership. But that's something that we're working on getting going. What I want to do is kind of follow the same model as we did with our transboundary program, where we get trained to do these to actually monitor the equipment, do all the sensor stuff and things of that nature. And what we want to be able to do is pass on, again, our knowledge, how we build our capacity, and do it with the tribes in Southeast Alaska. Because again, we can't do it by ourselves. Next, please. Well, wow. I try to talk slow. I guess I'm done, but yeah, no, I can't tell jokes. Yeah. No, but I would like to open it up for questions or comments or anything like that, to just anything I can address for you guys.
Hi, Ray.
Hi,
Thanks for
Brittany.
that presentation. I thought I heard something the other day about a recycling center
Yep.
out on Thane. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So just to give you a heads up, in Juneau, we are leasing a land out of the way, a little bit out of downtown. I don't know if you guys know Juneau well, but So Bernadine's mentioning this property that we're leasing with the city and borough of Juneau. We were supposed to have a cultural immersion park built there. But due to actual contaminated land stuff, it kind of put a stall on that. And we are actually creating a community center and education center and all that stuff in another area outside of Juneau. I'll talk a little bit about that maybe if you guys want to hear, but what we're hoping to do is use, I mentioned the solid waste stuff that we're doing. So we are hoping to use that same site actually to put our composter and solid waste efforts there. But right now what we're looking to do to ensure that we can do that, there's issues with the barge system getting it on there. So we're trying to figure out how AML does that. We don't know if it's going to be put out there just yet, so that it's touch and go.
Where there'll be, will you be able to go out to all the other smaller villages to collect
That's
as well?
That is definitely the hope. So we are going to be working with transport systems like AML to help with that in the long run. But I'm trying to lobby the tribe to actually invest in our own barge system. Because again, on the regional food aspect, you think about that, we'll be able to send our foods to these areas. We're looking at creating a hub essentially too. We don't know if the greenhouses will be community wide or if it will be a regional effort based in Juneau. So we're still trying to figure out what that looks like, but I know that it is going to be a region-wide thing. And I think logistically, it might be best to have it in one area. So Juneau might be that.
Right, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I'm being let off easy. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. I'm Russ Hepfer, and I'm part of the RTOC, and I wanted to ask about the senior policy advisor position.
Thank you, Russ.
And then a follow-up to that is we are now 501c3. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit?
Where we're at RTOC.
Yes.
So yeah, something as you guys may or may not know, but in the past, the EPA has always had a senior tribal policy advisor position. You guys may remember some of them. Winona Wilson was one of those. During the reorg right now, there's not necessarily that position there anymore. And it's not to take anything away from Casey as, you know, an indigenous leader that he is, and he knows Indian country. But again, one thing we know that EPA is spread thin in being able to ensure that they're reaching tribal country. So we are asking at the RTOC and other tribes throughout the nation that senior tribal policy advisor position be put back, and that it is a tribal person. There's a lot of EPA lifers out there, but we need to ensure that that tribal person is sitting at that table with us. So I'm hoping I meet that. Russ, if there's anything you wanted to add on that too, thank you. And what was the other question again? It was 501c3. Oh, so in part of our, at RTOC, we've been able to give ourselves a consortia status to not just kind of essentially be limited, and I don't want to say limited to the EPA, but it's allowed us now to be able to find other sources of funding, and we wanted to use that source of funding to essentially meet the needs of tribes in Region 10. So as we've now expanded into this consortia aspect, we can find other sources of dollars to ensure that we're representing you guys better or helping build out your capacity in that regards as well. But we don't want to take away from any of the other consortia efforts, but I think we could still meet the needs and hit the notes through our current consortia status that we've got. Russ, Bill, any of you guys have anything you want to add in regards to our talk now in the consortia status?
Well, this is Bill. I was going to go a little bit into co-management. I know in your region of Alaska and also in my region, there are some co-management efforts being made. In the Otner region of Alaska, which is central interior, eastern interior, we are actually partnered up with the Department of Interior and doing a tribal moose hunt, and we're able to issue, for the first time in Alaska's history, we can issue our own tribal moose permits in our region to hunt on federal land, which in our situation is of the 24 million acres, I think only 400,000 of those acres are federal. So it's a very small part of our region we can hunt on now, but it's a big step for the Department of Interior to branch out to our tribes and offer or accept our proposal to do this. And I think you guys have made some efforts in your region to do co-management too.
Yeah, thank you for that, Bill. Yes, so you guys may have been hearing that a lot, co-management, co-stewardship. And that's something that we've been striving for. Again, in Alaska, it looks different than it would down in the lower 48 because of your guys' ability to have traditional lands, your Indian country. We don't have Indian country per se in Alaska. So the co-management and co-stewardship aspect from government to government, it looks very different than it does in the lower 48. So one example, thank you, Bill, for bringing that up. One example, though, I'm hoping to is work to create co-management, co-stewardship on a government or federal government and state government and tribal government level. We've been successful this past couple months with the USDA. I don't know if you guys have been to Juneau, but there's a real famous landmark there called the Mendenhall Glacier. And that's ran by the Forest Service. So essentially the glacier is managed, governed, run by the Forest Service. We've been able at Tlingit and Haida to actually create co-stewardship agreement with the Forest Service. So now that we're working collaboratively side by side at the Mendenhall Glacier, while they have the rangers there, we also now have cultural ambassadors that we're calling that will be able to put interpretive trails, guidance, and literally work together. That's something I'm hoping that we can follow that model to where we're bringing that to the EPA. We don't, co-management, co-stewardship will look different on that side, but one thing I've been mentioning is because again, tribal coordinators on the EPA level are stretched thin. I'm proposing and hoping that we can bring back something like the Peer Assistance Provider Program where tribes are working collaboratively with the EPA to essentially meet the needs of gap issues and stuff like that. So that's something I think we're going to be pushing at the talk a little bit more to hopefully create co-stewardship with the EPA. I know you guys used to have, again, the Peer Assistance Providers Program, and that's kind of the model I'm hoping we could look at just to help ensure that we're meeting the needs of tribes throughout Region 10. We want to ensure that you guys are being helped because you guys are spread thin. The EPA is spread thin, and a lot of tribes are kind of left unsure of how to address certain needs, and who else better to do that than the people in your home region. So we're hoping that that could be something that we look at developing in the long run. Hi, Kayla.
Hey, Ray. So I mentioned this to Ray on break, and he just did the perfect segue for it. So you guys have heard this week about the TIC-TACs, the 2 environmental justice centers that are going to be in Region 10, but there is also one on the national level that funding was awarded to the National Indian Health Board. And they have a program. Those of us in EPA are still learning about it. So I am going to read from their website just to not, mischaracterize anything. But one of their programs is called the Tribal Environmental Impact Network. And they're describing it as a cohort of tribal professionals with experience in issues impacting environmental justice in Indian country. The network of experts will assist the National Indian Health Board in their TIC-TAC to provide technical assistance to tribal communities. And compensation will be offered for network members providing technical assistance. They're looking for experts in areas like air quality, water quality, solid waste, climate change, food systems. I think there are tribal experts in this room in all of those categories. And this seems like it's a new way through the TIC-TAC centers that tribes can work together to provide and be technical assistance providers to each other and share that knowledge peer-to-peer. So we'll try and put that link in the chat so folks can look at it. And then there's, it has like an interest form, so you can put in your name in areas where you think you have, knowledge that you can share. And again, remember the knowledge, it can be scientific knowledge, it can be traditional knowledge, it can be knowledge working on federal grants, or just, being someone who's done a lot of work in these areas. So we'll try to provide more information and outreach on that as we learn more about it and can share more about it with all of you.
Thank you for that, Kayla. I think as you guys are doing that though too, we've mentioned a couple times that RTOC hosts those town hall meetings. I think as you guys are developing that, that's something we'd like to invite you guys to be a part of as we meet with the other tribes so that they're very much aware of it as well. Any other comments, questions? Bernadine?
I know Tlingit and Haida just purchased some property. There's some property behind Fred Meyer's in that area, and there's other property that's out the road. Can you tell me what plans are for that property that's out the road?
So the one out the road, I am not entirely sure yet. I think they're still trying to figure some of those things out, but it's in Juneau right now, and throughout Southeast Alaska, the tribe is again buying up land. So it won't be considered tribal land, but we're purchasing these lands to address the needs basically of Southeast tribes. So the property behind Fred Meyer that Bernine's talking about, that's where we're going to have our cultural immersion park. We'll have an education center there, a tribal college, and our greenhouses. I'm hoping that's where where we put our greenhouses in the long run, and that might be the source of where we have the warehouse style greenhouses. But there's a lot of great things happening behind that area. They're still working on it, but that's kind of the idea, is essentially having that tribal college, the community effort, cultural immersion park, and things of that nature.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just kind of curious. I thought maybe you guys might be planning to do some farming out there or something.
I don't know if that's the approach. We still have to figure that out. I know the leadership's definitely got their eye on some kind of thoughts on that though. So I'm sorry, I couldn't provide more. What I hope though, I kind of hit the note on that co-management, co-stewardship approach. I don't know if it's registering or not, but this is stuff, again, on a regional effort, this is something that we feel is super important. We know it doesn't take, we want to ensure as we're doing these regional efforts that we're not trying to speak for tribes. We're not trying to take away any sovereignty. We're just trying to enhance it through regional efforts. So it ensure that we offset costs and share our resources, because it is tough out there. There's a limited capacity, but we can do things stronger if we work together. I hope I did all right, guys. I hope I hit the mark.
We do have one more comment.
Oh, keep going. Yeah.
Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Andrea.
I've known Ray for a long time. He's environmental manager. I know the Tlingit Haida Central Council. I know his aunts and his dear departed mom very well, who I miss very much. So with what I'm going to say, I just want everybody to know that, with all due respect to Ray, because I have a lot of affection for this guy and his mother and aunts and family. In Juneau, I never like to say but or however, because everybody waits for the other shoe to drop. But as you know, Ray, we had the Douglas Indian Association had the capital city of Juneau grow up around its village. And in 1962, they burned the Douglas Indian village, which was a Taku-Kwan village. And so as you all talk about partnerships, we really need to understand on the Region 10 level, and specifically for Alaska and Southeast Alaska in particular, that we're talking very separate tribal governments. We're talking clan houses, various clans. And in Juneau, there seems to be this notion that only the Akwan exists. And there's lack of recognition of the Taku-Kwan. The Douglas Indian Association's membership is comprised through its base roll that are the primary base roll, the beginning base roll, are that of both the Akwan and the Taku-Kwan.
Mm-hmm.
And what's troubling to me is when we see some leadership of Tlingit Haida Central Council kind of dating just the Akwan and not really having a meaningful dialogue with the Taku-Kwan. And we hear it when we do a land acknowledgement, the recognition of sometimes the Taku Kwan is added in there. So we're real impassioned about lifting up not only the Taku Kwan, but the Akwan as well. Our president is a descendant of both, matrilineal. He's Yanedi of the Taku Kwan, but he's grandchild of the Akwan. So we would hope, and I would encourage, that Tlingit Haida's Central Council be mindful of that the Douglas Indian Association, and I really dislike the word association. That goes back to 1934 when they wanted to coin all the tribes as associations, which makes it sound like we're just, you know, a special interest group and, but not a federally recognized tribe. So the Douglas Indian Association is actually looking at in terms of updating the Constitution and bylaws, we're looking at something that is indigenous to the region, that acknowledges the people of both the Akwan and the Taku Kwan. And the long and short of it is, I mentioned earlier on in the first day that we are all from Douglas Indian Association, tribal citizens of the Central Council of the Tlingit Haida Tribes of Alaska as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of very, very strong relationships with some of the staff there, you included, Ray.
Thank you.
We will always support you. We will always back you. And we would like to feel the same. And it's not you in particular, but it's the leadership as your the president and the executive council must rise to the occasion of recognizing the historic land-based federally recognized tribe there. And we often feel that we're pushed to the end of the line and there's more of a competitive relationship rather than a partnership. And I think you feel that as well. When it comes to matters of the Taku River and the Taku Inlet, that is a tribal territory of the Douglas Indian Association. And we should always have our feet at the table in matters involving that river in the inlet and the surrounding areas. There's a notion that the Taku Kwan is restricted to only Douglas Island, and that's a misnomer. The Juneau Indian Village, where the original headquarters of Tlingit Haida are based, that was both Taku and Akwan because of the intermarriages.
Right.
And so often we feel that it's an affront to the Douglas Indian Association when there's a separation between the Akwan and the Taku Kwan. Some of you may ask why this is important. It's very unique, the matrilineal society of the Tlingit and Haida nations. And when we go, say, for instance, in the Sitka tribal territory, and I think I mentioned that too, we harvest herring eggs there, food sovereignty, food security.
Right.
But it's always with regard to acknowledging that we are in the Sitka tribes of Alaska tribal territory. So I'm saying this very publicly, maybe some of Tlingit Haida's staff are online, because we would really urge, considering we're essentially just around the corner from you all, that the dialogue and the partnerships that we should be looking at building, you know, are right there to be nurtured for it to happen, with all differences set aside. Because I know Tlingit Haida Central Council is growing.
Yes.
With the American Rescue Plan Act funds, they're able to purchase a lot of real estate and property. And we are part of that citizenship, that membership, and we should, as a federally recognized tribe, land-based tribe there, be coming to the table with you instead of saying, well, you know, past issues, we consider them dealt with and move on. But you can't move on and leave some of your membership behind. And so I say this to you not to make it awkward for you. I think your dad's a former president of the Tlingit Haida Central Council. He was one of a kind. So I feel in my heart, because I worked under his administration as well, that he would know exactly what I'm speaking to, and I believe in my heart that you do too. And so we have to entrust to managers such as yourself and directors of Central Council that in looking at the historical aspects, that is actually a must to form strong partnerships, kinship, and so that we can work together in matters of the Taku and matters of the Aquan, the Taku Kwan. Central Council is regional, much like Sea Alaska, our corporation. So it's real expansive, your worldview compared to what we're looking at. And when I say your worldview, I mean that of Tlingit Haida Central Council, because smaller communities like Huna Indian Association, Wrangell Cooperative, Yakutat, they're going to look at it from that village perspective, what was once was, but
Right.
still is. But still is. So I appreciate you, Ray. I want you to know that, and everybody here, to know much affection for this guy up there and all that he's doing. But let's sit down sometime and have a heart-to-heart.
Thank you, Andrea, and nothing but love and respect to you guys as well. And as you know, I'm not, just so you guys know, I'm not a tribal leader. I'm a tribal employee. So much of what I can and can't say is, those things I can't address. But I do feel and understand where you're at. And much of the work that I do is to ensure that I'm helping as I'm building out our capacity, that I'm still working with you guys to ensure that we can have that strength, that unified voice, and not ensure that we're stepping on anyone, but empowering each other. So
And
I-
I just want to say, I recognize that greatly as tribal administrator for Douglas Indian Association, your working relationship with our environmental manager. And so that's, you and Bernadine are going to be more key than you think you can be, all politics aside. And just as an FYI, when we talk about tribal relations with the Environmental Protection Agency, the politics, are pretty sticky too within the Tlingit and Haida nations. So we all have to walk very softly amongst each other, and it really isn't unlike what's happening between the Republican and Democrat parties. But I think we always will fall on the same feet of needing to hold our people up.
exactly.
And help. Yeah. So thank you, Ray, for all that you do.
I greatly appreciate that a lot, Andrea. Thank you.
Gonna
Finish cheese. Comments, questions still? Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. Did I end too fast, Heather? Okay, up here.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for those questions and engagement.